Well said. Good evening. This is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee relative to the issue of permit fee increases that has been presented to, or proposed by the administration to the City Council a couple of weeks ago. So it was referred to this Finance Subcommittee, and that is the purpose of this meeting. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Chairman Elliott.
Here.
Counsel Leary.
Here.
Counsel Milonazo.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So with that, Mr. Manager, that introduction, as you have proposed increases that have not been evaluated or increased in quite some time. So perhaps we can start when the last time these increases, some have not been increased at all and others have. That might be a good place to start, and the purpose or the reasoning why we're looking at these fee increases.
The members of the subcommittee and Councilor Samaras and everybody watching at home. First of all, there has not been a comprehensive review of fees charged in the City of Lowell since 2008. So it's been more than 8 years since the last comprehensive review. So this is a good opportunity to look at our fees and to reassess them and if we need to change some of these fees. What we first did was we had each department reassess their fees by looking at surrounding communities and comparable communities and comparing our fees to their fees and making sure that they were commensurate, at least similar to comparable communities. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to emphasize that to make the actual cost of time and staff and other resources to reflect what the fee is. So for example, the cost of a building permit fee, obviously it's just not filling out the paperwork, it's a building inspector going out and inspecting the work that was done, make sure it was done in compliance with the building permit application. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to allocate that fee to the time and resources that the staff was spending on it. So in this case, the user would be paying the fee, not the general taxpayer. And we also were looking to make sure that the fees were examined for their impact as a deterrent to quality of life infractions. And there's 2 that I want to point out. And the fees that we're talking about tonight, the ones that have increased, are not for a punitive reason. These are just, the ones that are increasing are because they're commensurate with the amount of staff time and with similar communities. But I want to point out 2 fees that are being raised exponentially due to their deterrent value. Number 1 is the fine for illegal dumping. This is something that's been plaguing the city for years, and we want to make sure that people aren't engaging in illegal dumping. So we're going to increase that fine exponentially so that if you're caught illegal dumping, you're going to be punished appropriately for that, and you'll see a presentation in a moment. And the second one is vacant and foreclosed properties. Banks have been foreclosing on properties and doing nothing to maintain them or to sell them to new purchasers that would maintain them. So what we're doing is we have an annual registration fee right now, which is on the low scale. There's no incentive for them to flip these properties. So what we're proposing is to increase the registration on an annual basis exponentially, so there's an incentive for them to rehab these properties and sell them to new owners. So with that said, as I preface my remarks, this is the first time in over 8 years that we've taken a look at this. We're not doing this to increase revenue. What we're doing is just to make sure that the users of these permits are paying for the staff time involved in it and the resources we expend, and it's not the general taxpayer that's paying for those resources. So with that said, I've asked my finance team And Eric Slagle is here from Development Services, and Christine O'Connor from the Law Department, just to make a brief presentation, because I know it's much better, we get more done with questions and answers. So I just turn it over to Connor Baldwin, and if you could do a brief presentation of these fees.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the subcommittee and members of the City Council here with us tonight. The City Manager mentioned in his opening remarks that the key driving force here was not revenue generation, but mainly in cost recovery. There's a significant amount of cost from city departments in personnel, other ordinary expenses in a lot of the activities done here by the city, services provided to the residents and to the businesses. And in order to keep the revenues to meet those costs, we really do need to revise this schedule from time to time. Otherwise, the tax levy will disproportionately absorb that burden. So in order to pass the costs along to those who utilize the services, a re-examination of the fees periodically is warranted. So just before we get into the brief presentation here, a couple of points. A number of these revisions were based on some input from the City Council relative to illegal dumping, some of the fees, and they've come via a number of motions by the City Council that were taken into consideration by the finance team in our review. A number of these fees also are relative to departments that are overseen by various advisory bodies. So the finance team consulted with those various advisory bodies, the Cemetery Commission, the Board of Parks, for example, to get their input. So this really is a comprehensive review with all stakeholders' input taken into consideration. So without further ado, we'll start jumping into some of the fees, and I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Slagle for some of the development services related items.
Thank you. As the manager mentioned, there are a couple of fees that we proposed increases to for the specific deterrent value of those fees. The first is having to do with vacant and foreclosed property registration. Since the onset of the vacant foreclosed ordinance, the annual registration fee has remained a static $100 per year. This fee, quite frankly, doesn't serve as any sort of deterrent for a financial institution or a property owner who has a vacant property from continuing to maintain it in its vacant and or foreclosed status. And as folks in the neighborhoods who live next to these vacant properties can tell you, they often serve as kind of a drain on the neighborhood. They tend to be, to harbor squatters. There's sometimes illegal activities occur in these properties. And even though we try to stay on top of the banks to maintain them in a secure fashion, quite frankly, it'd be much easier on everyone if the lending institution or the owner turned that back into productive use. So we proposed an increase from $100 to $1,000 for the annual fee for a vacant foreclosed property. In addition, that fee goes up $1,000 per year that the property is in the system. So the first year you would pay $1,000, the second year you'd pay $2,000, the third year you'd pay $3,000, and so on and so forth, with the idea that this would give a strong incentive to the owner of the property to take it out of our program, so it's not a vacant or foreclosed property.
Okay, can I just jump here while it's fresh in my memory? So do you anticipate any legal challenge to this, that it's going to double, and in some cases quadruple over a number of years, if the bank comes back and says, well, look, we just can't sell it? Is there any legal, we have legal standing where we can develop any fine that we want, and other communities, have other communities done this successfully?
I don't know if you've looked at other communities.
In fact, they have. We
Okay,
were at
good.
we were at a seminar where other municipalities have. In fact, I believe this exact formula was the formula that we mirrored off a different municipality. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly which municipality it was.
That's okay, that's fine. I just want to ensure that we're adopting something, A, that has been put in place, and if not, that's okay, but if we're on firm standing to go, I mean, we could do 1,000, we could do, I mean, it's whatever we feel will motivate the banks and or individuals to do something about the property.
Right, that's what I was gonna say, that the fee structure is set up as a deterrent. And so the longer you stay out of compliance, the more of a penalty, financial penalty, you will receive.
Do you have some idea of how many properties we have that this would apply to currently?
Currently, we have active registrations from the last 2 calendar years of right around 400 properties. Wow. Now, again, as Mr. Baldwin mentioned earlier, we don't expect this to spur a large-scale increase in fees that will be maintained. The idea is there will be a spike in fees, obviously, because you're going from $100 to $1,000. But our goal is to have that revenue, quite frankly, drop off as the banks become more diligent and keep getting these properties off of the vacant and foreclosed list.
Okay. Yeah, Councilor Leahy?
Just quickly, if my own edification, basically, so the house goes vacant, what are the timeframes to get to that fee? That full year, or are you paying it as soon as it becomes vacant? And I guess a preceding question would be, what is the full definition of a vacant lot? I know it's pretty obvious, but what are you determining that definition to be?
Right. The typically, and I'll be honest, the vacant properties are a very, 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 very small portion of this list. What's the largest portion of this list, quite frankly, the overwhelming portion of this list, are properties that are in the foreclosure process with a lending institution. So they file an order of notice indicating to the owner that they are beginning kind of the foreclosure process. At that point in time, the bank has to register with the city. If we find out, we get notifications from the Registry of Deeds when those orders of notice are filed in Lowell, and we send out notification to the lending institution. You have 30 days within which to register. And that is the time when you'd have to pay the fee, when you register.
So for foreclosed homes, then within 30 days, they would have to register to pay the fee?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Milanazzo? So I just asked Councilor Milanazzo, our resident banker, or previous, of these 400, most of them are national lenders. They may not even know that they exist because the real estate market in Lowell, as far as I know and what we read and see, is red hot. So you say, or is active. I mean, it's a desirable place to live. And we have 400 properties that are presumably sitting there, and it's unfortunate. So I hope this works. I mean, are most of these in livable conditions? Is this back from, the real estate?
Well, again, this is things that have been actively registered in the last 2 years. So these are not, this is not things that we haven't been informed about. These are things that we've been informed about and have current active registrations. They've paid their $100 fee.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, let's continue with the presentation.
Just a quick, and I apologize. So basically, it's not like the house that's in probate then. So for some houses, I know across the street from me, I had a family that was in probate for a year. That's not the same thing. It's foreclosure by the bank. So a house could still sit there for a while if it's in probate court sorting out a will or what have you then, or potential some other issues. It's clearly just foreclosure issues that they get the 30-day notice, and that's when they got to put the fee in.
Those are the vast majority of properties that are in the program right now. There is a definition of a vacant property in the ordinance. I apologize, I don't have the ordinance in front of me. So if you leave a property vacant for a certain period of time, we then deem it vacant and it becomes required to be registered under the ordinance. That's a longer time span. If the bank starts a foreclosure process, we just say, you're supposed to register it right away. We give them 30 days before we start finding them. So they have a 30-day window within which to register.
Councilor Lee?
Thank you. Just quickly, I understand the idea is to move these properties off. Did we look at charging like 0.5% of the value versus going up to 1,000? Any other communities do that?
In my review of other communities, I didn't see anyone that took that tack. I think the difference, I would defer to the city solicitor, but I see that the challenge with that would be, who sets the value, and are we going to get in some sort of battle
Well,
with
if it
every
was just
time
off
a
the
fee we try
tax
to-
rate, you know, even if it were just off the tax rate, it'd be a very aggressive way to get these houses.
No, so we didn't look at that, no,
Okay.
we were trying to get something that would be
All right.
fairly
No, I
streamlined.
appreciate it, and it's a good way to do it, you know, the first penalty and then it doubles and so forth. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll proceed.
So the next slide and one of the next highlights that we wanted to hit upon for the subcommittee was in the revamping of the illegal dumping fees. At the request of the council, the administration has revamped the illegal dumping fines in the general ordinances by instituting a tiered system ranging from $500 to $2,500 based on the severity of the dumping. We believe these higher fines will serve as a deterrent to preventing dumping from happening. So as you can see from the slide there, based on the severity, the fine will be commensurate with the dumping violation. The next item to highlight is sort of a change in the way that some of the fines are structured in the fee schedule, or I'm sorry, the permits. And this is relative to plumbing, gas, and electrical permits. And again, I'll ask Mr. Slagle to describe some of the changes that are being proposed.
Thank you. So again, across, quite frankly, the Commonwealth for many years, it's been common practice for plumbing and electrical permits to, rather than to have permit fees based off the cost of the work, to have permit fees based off of the number of fixtures or the amount of amperage or the size of piping that's going into a property. And while this has been the longstanding way that lots of cities and towns do it, it often leads to some inequalities based on the types of projects that come in. So for instance, the two examples that are listed above are things that have, these are examples that actually happen in our office on a regular basis under this fee structure, which is a plumber comes in and is working in a large building, but doing a minimal amount of work in each separate unit. We charge per dwelling unit right now and per number of fixtures. So if you change one fixture in 150 units, you could end up having a project that only cost $11,000 for the property to do it, but a $9,000 permit fee, which leaves us in the position of having to speak to the administration or having to come up with a way to mitigate what appears to be a very unfair fee. The flip side is we oftentimes do have large commercial projects that come in with limited numbers of fixtures but large amounts of cost that are very complicated projects, but in our, under our fee schedule, they only have a limited number of quote-unquote fixtures. And as such, they could be paying a very minimal amount of fee for a project that, again, in the example, is almost 20 times as large as the project in the multifamily residential unit. So what we are doing, and quite frankly, what we're doing across the board with our development services fees, is proposing a change so that every permit that we issue that works in the system will go on cost, and it's the same cost. It's going to be $50 for the first 1,000 and $10 for every 1,000 over that. And the idea is that it will provide the appropriate level of oversight for the complexity of the project. Quite frankly, the larger and more expensive a project is, the more time that it takes for our inspection staff to review it, the more time it takes for our inspectors to do the inspections on it. And so across the board, we're trying to switch to this method so that our fees accurately reflect the amount of cost of the project and requisite staff time.
Can you give some examples of some of those larger complex ones? I'm sure there are lots of them, whether it's
Sure. So, for instance,
big residential.
So, well, I was going to say the Markley Group, for
Yep.
instance, had some very, they installed an entirely new plumbing system, water piping system around the building, and all of those buildings have a lot of because water cooling is what they do for the white space, because water is a much more effective way to cool down the space to keep it at an appropriate temperature. And as such, they are spending huge quantities of money in the seven or eight figures on what would be typically considered a plumbing permit. They don't pay anywhere near the amount of fees that they would be paying under the new schedule, because they simply aren't putting a whole lot of fixtures in. They have a large pipe, so they have a large kind of entry fee to get because of the large pipe. But their project is quite frankly more complex than our current plumbing. Our current plumbing fees are set up to handle. So what we're doing is actually simplifying it for everyone. It's just based on the cost. Whatever your contract says with the person that you're doing the plumbing work with, or the electrical work with, or the demolition work with, or the siding work with, that cost we put into the very simple calculator that says, based on that cost, you're going to pay a fee, and that's kind of the simplest way to deal with it.
Okay. So that being said, I do recall, I believe it was a year ago, that we have been going after the permits are pulled and an estimate is given by the contractor. And let's face it, more often than not, they will lowball it because they don't want to pay a higher fee. I get it. But if they have been doing this in some instances, and we are going back to say, you're doing more work, and as a result, your fee is going to increase, and that's permissible under the statute, right?
Absolutely, it's
Is
written
that
right into the
based on an
building code.
assessment, the assessed value after the project is complete?
No, it's based on the actual cost of the work, including all the change orders that, and especially in those large projects, happen regularly. We were not capturing either contractor underbidding, undervaluing their work, or the fact that the scope of a project changed over the course of the construction, so that what started out as $1 million job is now $1.5 million job, but their permit fee, even if they were being above board, they only said $1 million
Right.
in the initial application. So that's a function of the building code. We will continue to do that. This, quite frankly, change makes it that much easier.
Right.
Because we will be getting costs in the inception, and then, affidavits of cost at the end of the project.
Okay, good. So you'll essentially be doing what's taking place now, both at the front end and, if necessary, at the back end, right?
Yes,
Okay.
and it was one of the challenges with the affidavits, cost affidavits, is we never necessarily had the plumbing and electrical costs, because our current fee structure doesn't require the plumbers or electricians to provide it to us.
Got it.
So it
Makes
left kind of a
sense.
gap that we were guessing about.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Baldwin?
Hold on one sec. So just to summarize, the reason for showing these examples was that these are types of changes that will be changing the way that we charge, or the fee structure. And the reason for that is not to unduly burden small businesses or the residential tax base. Because if the costs related to inspections or Mr. Slagle's department are not recovered through the fees, then they will be recovered by the tax levy. And the rationale behind looking at these and trying to raise some of the fees and lower some fees commensurate with the work is to make sure that it's not unduly burdening the tax levy. So the next example is of some of the cost recovery measures, and specifically an example in the city clerk's office. And I want to point out a lot of work went into surveying comparable communities by Deputy CFO Rodney and Heather from the city manager's office. So I'm going to turn it over to Rodney to describe some of those efforts.
Thank you. So the clerk's office is a clear one where we can project out what we expect the revenue increase to be. Based on our analysis, it'll see a significant jump from 278 in 16, 17, obviously we're only halfway through, and then 2018, based on the recommended fee increases, we'd bring in about $403,000. For comparison's sake, the city clerk FY17 budget, salary and wages as well as expenses, is roughly $390,000. So for the first time, I would assume, in FY18, if these changes were approved, we could be looking at funding the city clerk office entirely through the certificates issued.
And this was, as I mentioned, the rationale for many of the departments. So analyzing the finance plan for each department to see fines, licenses, permits, any of the fees in the fee schedule, and trying to adjust them according to expenses of the city. So the next example is again in development services,
Can you
but
just go back to the first one, just back to the city. So what fees exactly, what would go up? For example, just,
So that includes birth certificates, death
so if
certificates.
I want a dog license, how much more would I have to pay for a dog license, for example? I mean, I think that's kind of important. What exactly are we increasing by what percentage? I mean, I can understand why, because ultimately, like you said earlier, the tax levy is funding a lot of this department, almost, well, not half, but pretty
So-
close to it.
So for dog licenses, the only one that will be increasing will be for unspayed or non-neutered dog, and that'll go from $10 to $20. And again, that's encouraged people to
To spay,
spade or
okay.
neuter their dog, yeah.
All right, so then just for birth certificates then, just out of curiosity.
5 to 20.
It's 5 to 20. I didn't have a copy of the, so I
I-
apologize.
think
5 to
that'd be
20 for
important.
the attested, yeah.
I know this, I know the schedule, I think there were 13 pages of proposed increases. If you could get that back out to members of the council, just so they know. I mean, we're talking about the big ones, the general ones, the ones that sort of precipitated this discussion that, you know, the taxpayers are losing money, the city's losing money based upon staff and the resources that we need to provide. So I think that's helpful. And most of these are minor. Most of them, in my opinion, after reviewing, they really don't affect, you know, the homeowner, if you will. Like the dog licenses, those aren't going up. I mean, we don't want to, in my opinion, we don't want to raise fees so much that people aren't going to either register or pull out permits or, you know, small things that we, you know, that require a permit, but we don't want to put such a great, you know, a heavy burden that it's ignored.
No, I think you put it, just to back up, but I think that's exactly why you wanted to say, here's exactly what these are and point them out. Because people are going to ask, why, you're raising revenue, you're basically not doubling revenue, but you're jumping it pretty significantly. But the reality is you're doing two things. One, you're encouraging appropriate behavior, it's like the dog license. You're not penalizing the average person really, and ultimately, and the tax levy. But ultimately, you're going to end up funding the city clerk's office for at least the salaries and the health insurance, hopefully. So I think you got to really just kind of lay it out point by point. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, Counselor, and we will provide a copy of the schedule, and because this is a change to the ordinance, there will be a public hearing, I believe, if that's correct, before the council takes action on amending any of these, so that's an excellent point. But just to mention some of the highlights of the changes in development services, again, in the sealer of weights and measures, the city contracts with NEMCOG, a regional agency of local governments, for conducting those inspections, and our costs for participating in that have increased. So likewise, we've selected just a couple of the costs and raise those slightly, so those would be in the sealing of like the gas tanks at gas stations and then the scales at some of the markets. And finally, this last slide is just to highlight some of the calculations, an example of some of the calculations that went into determining some of the costs. So in issuing a TIF to tax increment financing benefit to a business to, say, for example, try to lure them to locate in the city, which is a very effective tool in the Economic Development Office, a significant amount of work goes into coming to agreement with the private company such that we wanted to make sure the city was able to recover those costs that went into coming up with that agreement that is ultimately voted on by the city council. So this is just, the slide on the screen details those costs and how the fee was based on recovering only those costs. So that's the end of our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have.
Yeah, I'd like to go right to Councilman Linazzo. He has a number of questions that he has been patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a couple of questions. Before we started the meeting, Chairman Elliott and I were talking about how these might impact the consumer, and clearly, based on your presentation, they're going to impact the people who are really using the services of the city, and that makes this more palatable from where I sit. My question, though, has to do with the new fees for the cemetery, and I know you mentioned the Cemetery Commission did weigh in on this, but if you take a plot or 4-vault grave and you go from 2,500 to 2,900 based upon your proposal, which I think seems reasonable, does the consumer then have to, I guess, could the cemeteries in question charge the consumer more than they're paying the city? So if they're paying the city $2,900 for a 4-lot, could they then say, well, the city went up and we're charging you as the consumer $3,200? I mean, is that something that could happen, or is it just a pass-through to the consumer? And again, maybe I'm not phrasing my question, but again, it's going from 2,500 to 2,900. Is it going to just be the 2,900 to the end consumer, or
Yeah.
It will?
If I understand your question correctly, the motive in no case here was to generate a profit on any of the operations. So in no case would there be an instance where a fee or a service were provided and the fee was more than just the recovery of cost.
Okay.
So I just want to jump in. We have private cemeteries and city cemeteries. So, I mean, I think that's where the question is it going to be, if it's city, it's going to be passed on, but I don't know.
Right.
Councilman
No,
Linazzo,
that's
is that
fair, yeah.
Right, the city, and it's just what the fee is, it's
Gotcha.
2,900. They can't say, well, no, we decide we're gonna pay, we're gonna
Okay.
charge you 3,200.
Okay.
It's what the fee that's set.
Okay.
We're thinking ahead on this, way ahead.
Right. And then my last question has to do with it looks like a new fee for lighting at Colley Stadium and for alumni. So again, just thinking about all of the neighborhood groups that might, and again, maybe I'm just not understanding it, but it's gone from $0 to $100. Not a big sum, but for a 4-hour slot for lighting. Is that something that we end up charging back to the leagues, or is that something that, yes, we charge back? Okay.
Yeah, we found out we have to have an employee go out there to turn on and turn off the lights.
Okay.
And yes, it's gone back to the leagues also.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's all I had, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
I'm good with that. I mean, I understand that there is a cost, particularly at Colley, but there are some, that's something we probably should take a look at, is those parks that are left on, whether it's by accident or not, because that's perhaps one of the first complaints we'll see. Well, we have to pay for it here, but you go to another park and it's on till,
Forever.
forever. So,
Just follow up to that,
Councilor
but so,
Leary.
say Colley, but don't you have a person that's there already anyway? So are you paying 2 fees, or is this gonna be one? See, that's the question, because you are renting, I mean, basically in the schools, for example, you're renting a custodian, you're renting a custodian. And I guess in other city buildings, but isn't there an individual there already, or is it just someone coming there?
Individual there, but there's some events that they're not covering because of the time constraints.
Okay,
So we have to hire somebody.
someone has to go there,
Yeah.
put it on, okay,
So this is incorporated into the fee for the particular activity going on.
okay.
Yeah.
right,
We
thank
have
you.
one individual, but, after that, we have to start paying overtime if there's additional events going on.
Okay,
for the longest time, there was an electrician. The city electrician goes to all High football games or any event. And if that's still the case, then this is in addition to, or
Yes, that's right.
separate events?
Because we've had other events that need the lighting out there.
Right. Okay.
Great. Councilor Lay, the maker of the motion.
Thank you. No, I think this is a lot of good work. Talking to different contractors throughout the year, I think we were way behind on some of our fees, so we were missing out on money. And like we said, this isn't just to raise revenue, but it's to change behavior. It's just to be updated with what other communities are doing our size, so we're not missing out. So I appreciate all the work that went into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anything else? Counselor Samaras? Mr. Clerk, Counselor
No,
Malinowski,
if-
Mr.
if-
Clerk, did you want to weigh in? Okay.
The only thing I was going to say, if it's appropriate, I would move, Mr. Chairman, that the Finance Subcommittee recommend to the full City Council that we schedule the fees as presented for a public hearing.
Motion by Counselor Malinowski that we proceed with having the recommendation to the City Council that we schedule a public hearing for the second by Counselor Larry. Mr. Clerk, before we take that,
Just one thing, it just should be referred up to the Law Department as well to draft that ordinance so it can come down in the form of a first reading, then to be put on for a public hearing.
amended by
I'll
the
amend the
maker
motion.
of the motion to refer that to the Law Department as well. Further discussion on that motion? Roll call.
Chairman Elliott?
Yes.
Counsel Leary?
Yes.
Councilman Alonso?
Yes.
3.
3 yeas, motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Manager, and your team. We want to get this in before the holiday because we will not have a meeting next week, and there's a subcommittee meeting tomorrow already, but I think it was worthwhile to schedule it on a separate night, so we're not rushing through it. So anything further, Mr. Manager? Any expectation on when you're looking to put this on the agenda, the beginning of the year, presumably? All right.
Yeah, based upon the time schedule, since the law department will have to draft the ordinance, we'll have it on for the beginning of the year.
Good. Well, I want to thank the subcommittee members for being able to make it here, so we're not starting the new year with a subcommittee meeting. We'll be proceeded with these fee increases, which may work out pretty well. Motion to adjourn by Councilor Larry, second by Councilor Malinazzo. All those in favor signify by saying aye, and the opposed, that motion carries. This meeting stands adjourned.
All right, thank you. Good job. Let's have it.